Welcome back to another episode of NRL by Jellyman. So episode 2, round 1 review coming up, round 2 preview, and then round 2 best bets that we've got off the top of our head, running through these obviously previews and reviews from last week, etc, etc. But look, we'll jump into it straight away. Looking back last Thursday, March 2nd, Parramatta Eels versus the Melbourne Storm. Obviously the Eels went down 12-16 in Parramatta at CommBank Stadium. Penzini, a try in the 29th minute. Junior Bowler in the 58th minute. Nick Meaney at the 46th minute. Young Tomonopeta, 62nd minute. And then Harry Grant obviously crossing the line for the game winner in overtime. Obviously tough for Eels plus line. Eels head to head. Melbourne Storm keep that streak alive, but I guess our brief takeaways from watching that game was the Eels offense looked clunky. They're sort of, I guess their forwards, they're really missing Ryan Madison. Obviously it's quite a new forward back compared to last year. Their outside backs weren't as strong as they usually are. They just weren't the same team that potentially played in that final series towards the back end of last season that they are now, and it'll sort of show. But maybe once a few sort of players come back into the lineup, I mean, Sean Lane was a big out. Obviously, once Ryan Madison comes back into that ball playing middle, and the guys around him will potentially get better. But I guess for the Eels, they've got quite a tough run coming up as well. I think they've got Penrith, Sydney, quite a few big teams coming off buys as well. That's what we've heard. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up sort of 6 weeks into the comp. Are they 2-4? Are they 3-3? Are they 4-2? Whereabouts they end up? Can they get up from last week? But I mean, the glaring sign for us is after scoring quite big in the trials and always being an offensive team, only to score 12 points against a Storm side that, to be honest, they stuck in the game, but they weren't great either. Obviously, getting the win in that one matters, but we can't see that, I guess, forward domination from them that they usually have. The outside backs getting the runs on the board. I mean, a lot of it has to come through Harry Grant, Jerome Hughes, and Cameron Munster. Nick Meaney does a job for them at the back, running the ball back, but I'm not sure how far they can go in 2022 with the lineup that they currently have. But of course, they'll find a way to make finals and etc, etc. But our sort of take on that game is both teams will be in probably a similar spot towards the back end of the season, just depending on health. I mean, Cameron Munster's going to be out with that compound fracture for a couple of weeks. So who comes in there? Obviously, Tyron Wishart probably comes in to play that role, and he'll do a job. But that ball playing of Munster and that running of Munster is a huge thing for Melbourne. They actually play the Bulldogs this week, and we'll go into a bit more about that later in the show. But that's obviously that game sort of touching on. There's not too much to touch on. It was a good win by the Storm. They always find a way. Friday's game with the Warriors versus the Sharks, obviously in New Zealand. The Warriors winning 20-12. Edward Kusi, Afoa, Nicole Klokstad and Egan all score for the Warriors. Fitzgibbon and Hunt score for the Knights there. Sean Johnson 2 of 4, Jackson Hastings 2 of 2 there. Takeaways from that match, we actually watched this one as well, were the Warriors looked okay, but the Knights allowed them in the game. The Knights had plenty more possession down their end, but they just couldn't convert. So it's that once again fact of, they've got the team on paper. They look like they can do it, but they just can't put it together. Even with Kalen Ponga in the 6, he did look threatening. Obviously, he went off with that HIA, but even if he stays on, I don't think they win. The Warriors just grinded them out. And with the Warriors team on paper compared to the Knights team on paper, you look and go, the Knights really should have won that game. Now, obviously, New Zealand being at home, new coach, etc, etc. They grinded out a win in that one, but I think it's going to be a tough year for Knights fans. And, as we said in our season preview, if the Warriors can get wins like this at home, there'll be a lot better team for it towards the back end of the season, and even sort of challenge some of those top-ended teams that come into town for them. The other game on that night was the Panthers versus the Broncos. The Panthers looked very clunky offensively. They weren't hitting their lines. Dylan Edwards ran for a lot of meters, but Toho didn't do much. Crichton had an okay game, but on offense, so he had an okay game running the ball out of the back, but when he was getting it, he missed an easy pass. He dribbled it off his ankle and it went 2 meters. Like, there was just little things like that just like there weren't the usual Panthers clicking, and now we look at them and go, oh, it could be all worry signs, but I don't think so. I think looking at that, we go, they are a team that has come off a premiership, that finished up late in the season, that had a lot of players go to the World Cup, and they're really only just potentially had a very shortened preseason compared to a lot of teams. Whereas the Broncos obviously didn't play finals. They've had a fair amount of time to get to know each other. I know they're just up the road from us here, and they've been grinding for quite a while now. Yes, there's been a bit of coach drama, etc., but that was towards the back end of towards last year, and it's only just coming up in the media sort of now, so you can't sort of look at that. But even the Broncos offensively looked clunky, but it was just their defense. I mean, Farnworth scored 2 tries for them. On the other side, obviously, Crichton scored a try, and Sonny Luke scored that try. He looked good in dummy half, so it'll be interesting to see if he gets more minutes week in, week out. But he looked like that sort of Api Coruscant molded type 9. Mitch Kinney comes in for that first 20 minutes, takes the grunt. Sonny then comes in for the next 60 and sort of ball plays and gets them moving once the sting's out of the game. But in regards to the Panthers, I think no worries on their side. It's just they've got to build into the season. I think they've got to buy in round 3 and expect them 3 rounds in to then take some stock and look at, okay, let's now power through the season. They've always got a good game this week, which we'll touch on later on. And for the Broncos, I mean, positive signs. They come back up to Suncorp this weekend to play the Cowboys, and potentially the offense might open up. Reynolds looked good. Man ran at the ball and was energetic. They need to get Katoni Staggs in more involved. Like a look at the runs that Farnworth had, and he was just elite. But Staggs needs that same type of work. They're meant to potentially get Walsh back this week, which we'll cover off later on in the piece. But all in all, a good first up game for the Broncos, and obviously the Panthers disappointing to pretty much have 2 losses in a row. Similar, exact same scoreline, obviously with similar type weather as well. Moving into Saturday's game, so the Sea Eagles versus the Bulldogs. The Sea Eagles 31, Bulldogs 6. Trebojevic the first try. Garrick and then DCE had a hat-trick. Reid Marnie scored the only try for the Bulldogs there. We only got to watch a little bit of this one because we were about to play football. AFL, that is. But looking at this one, I mean, watching the mini back and going, hey, you know, the Sea Eagles did what they needed to do. Their middles were stronger. Their outside backs were stronger. They were stronger in pretty much every area. And the Bulldogs, as we mentioned in our season preview as well, and last week, they've got some room to grow. Obviously, they're starting to get the list on paper. They blooded some new Bulldogs. Like, they've just got to grow throughout the season, and they've got to be a week-on-week grind. There are some players where I'm just like that kick out in the full. Why is a big man getting the ball and having to kick? Just little things like that you go, like that wouldn't happen at an elite club. They're on their way, but they're not just there yet. So expect a few more losses like this for the Bulldogs in this early part of the season. They come up against the Storm, so it'll be really 50-50. How can the Storm attack? But we'll go into that a little bit later in the piece. Next game was the Cowboys and the Raiders. Cowboys 19, Raiders 18. Once again, didn't get to watch this game. We were playing football, but looking back at it, Drinkwater obviously killed it early, but the Cowboys really should have run away with this one, but they didn't actually score a try after halftime, and then the Raiders got back into the game there for that one, but we don't have too much to touch on in that one, just not being able to watch it back properly or have a look into it in depth. The next game, the Sharkies and the Rabbitohs, we did get to watch a bit of this one. The Sharks really did miss Hines, and we potentially got it wrong on this one. We potentially had the Sharks at home, and the South, they won 27-18. Trindle scored a try, Katoa and Wilton scored a try, and then Elias looked really good. He scored the opening try, Kaloa Matangi, and then Graham had a double. And the lines that Graham runs are incredible. The way he can sort of, I guess, mold his body into various different shapes and positions and all that sort of jazz. It was super. And Latrell Mitchell hasn't missed a conversion in a long time. I think so. I saw someone write up about it, round 22 last year. I think it was the last time, and something like 29 straight conversions. So that's an interesting little stat there for them. But obviously the Sharkies, they need Hines back. Running, kicking, ball playing. Trindle just doesn't have the kicking ability. Moylan is not great on the boot either. He's better to be your playmaking half and linking up, not kicking like Hines does. And for the South, they just roll on. They look really good. They look structured. They look like a team that could potentially beat the Panthers next week as well. Sunday, the Dolphins beat the Roosters 28-18. Now, I was on a flight back and got to watch a bit of this one. The Dolphins just were more intense. They just wanted to win the game more. It's as simple as that. Obviously, on paper, you're looking, you go, that Dolphins team were, some real good a couple of good first grade players, but a lot of potential like fringe players. But, guys like Kafus and Bromwich, the Bromwich brothers, like they bring that energy and they bring that will and they sort of drag guys along with them. And you saw with the Storm game that was missing for the Storm, but it was there at the Dolphins game. And, that's where a lot of those tries come out of, like those effort plays, like, Kafusi snapping blokes, like unreal. But then the Roosters towards the other way, they just looked clunky and dysfunctional, and we should have really been able to not pick it, but potentially pick that plus line that we didn't, being the Dolphins' first game. But the Roosters, they looked clunky in preseason against the Sea Eagles, and they looked clunky this time last season. So I don't know if it's they get a lot of work in around this time of year to then build towards and taper off towards, the middle parts of the season and make sure they can win a few games then, or they plan their schedule out. Not too sure, but look for potentially the Roosters to maybe lose a couple of games in the interim while they do build into the season. But they've got the list on paper to still contend, and it's not worry signs there for them. Last but not least for the round, the Tigers against the Titans. The Tigers lost 10-22. Obviously, the Titans had Sami score a double, McIntyre, Brimson, Dewey and Laurie. For this one, it's funny, the Tigers had a lot more possession. The Titans had a lot of missed tackles, something like 40 plus missed tackles, and the Tigers just couldn't make them pay. So it's the same old story for them with, that offensive clunkiness. Where do you get to on the field? And, once Coruscant come on, it opened up. So after he came on after that sort of 40th or how many other minutes, he came on in that second half and he dominated for them. But have them on there at the start of the game. You're potentially not down 12-0 at halftime, or you're not down 12-0 at halftime. You're actually in the game, but they just weren't. And the Titans just obviously grinded out a win. It's as simple as that. They were the better team on the day, and it'll be interesting to see the Tigers play the Knights this week, and that'll be an interesting preview to write up about. But that's all for the week preview. Obviously, we'll touch on these games quickly. We don't want to go over it too much. We'll potentially touch on it more and more as we go in the previews and everything like that. But it's just a quick sort of snapshot of the week that has just gone. But looking into the round 2 preview now, so I've got the Panthers playing the South on a Thursday night out there at Bluebet Stadium. So a couple of, bit of team news. So Scott Sorensen did suffer a Category 1 knock against the Broncos. We'll have to go through concussion protocols. Zach Hosking potentially is the man in. It's got here at the moment, Scott Sorensen's actually out. Matt Eisenhuth is in. We'll just go 1 through 18. So for the Panthers, Edwards, Taruva, Tygo, Crichton, To'o, Luai, Cleary, Yota, Kenny, Fisher-Harris, Garner, Martin, and Yo. On the bench, they've named Luke, Eisenhuth, Lenu, and Salmon. And they've still got Zach Hosting in that reserve spot. For the South, out is Arrow and Totola. In is Saluka, Kafita, and Milne. So through 1 through 18 is Mitchell, Johnson, Tass, Graham, Thompson, Walker, Elias. Saluka, Kafita starts in the 8 for obviously probably Jai Arrow. For Totola, sorry. Cook, Burgess, Koloamatangi, Chi Cam, Kanzin, Murray, captains there. Taff, Cartwright, Mole, and Mitchell all on the bench there. A bit of stats for them there. The Panthers have won 9 of their last 10 games against the Rabbitohs. Crichton has scored in 6 of his last 7 games has scored 6 tries from his past 7 games against the Rabbitohs. Rabbitohs 5-8. Cody Walker has scored a try in his past 5 games against the Panthers. The Panthers haven't lost back-to-back NRL games at Bluebet since 2019, round 7 and then round 10. So obviously a bit of a break in that one. The Panthers winger Brian To'o made 97 post-contact meters in round 1 to lead the NRL in that category. But even then, he didn't really have a big game impact-wise in our point of view anyway. So that's a few stats there. Obviously, Jai Arrow out with a hamstring, Totola HIA. Hammond Saleh is a chance to return as well as Tane Milne. But yeah, obviously both those guys. Tane Milne is in the reserves there, so he's a maybe. Looking at previous matchups these guys had, so the 3 previous matchups, the Panthers won 32-12, 26-22, and then 26-12. In that 32-12 preliminary final last year at a core stadium, Coruscant, To'o, Lenu, Tego, and Cleary all scored. Walker and Kenner scored there. Back in a core stadium again in round 23. Johnson, Walker, Graham, and Johnson. Well, Johnson scored a double. Crichton, Edward, Lenu, and Martin there. And then 26-12 back at Bluebet Stadium. Tago, Crichton, May had a double, and Martin, Graham, and Walker. So look at Martin. He's got a couple of tries in the last 3 games there. Also Walker a couple of tries, and then Crichton 1, 2, and yeah, in 2 of his last 3 games, Crichton's also scored. So a few good sort of try scorer markets in that space there. Our prediction for the game will go in topic 3, but we might be staying away from a head 10 in that one with how both teams look, and maybe just going something like even like a points over, depending on the weather, even a try scorer multi in that matchup, as it's just 50-50 being this early part of the season and teams looking clunky and potentially dysfunctional. Looking at now Friday, the Eels versus the Sharks. So we'll just go straight into the teams. So out is Lumi for the Eels, and then out for the Sharks, obviously Jack Williams and Wade Graham with that suspension. 1 through to 18 for the Eels is Gutherson, Sevo, Penzini, Blake, Russell, Brown. So Russell obviously comes in onto that sting. Brown, Moses, RCG, Hodgson, Borlo, Cartwright in the 11, Dory 12, Hopgood 13, and then Murchie, Momasia, Greg, and Makatoa on the bench there. Jake Arthur in the 18 there. And for the Sharks, Kennedy, Katoa, Ramian, Talakai, Mulatalo, Moylan, Trindle, Rudolph, Brayley, Haminuele, Nakora, Wilton, Finucane, McGuinness on the bench, Hunt, Kafusi, and Tracy. We look at these head-to-heads here, and the 11, 12, and 13 is the big point of difference we see between both teams. Cartwright, Dory, Hopgood against Nakora, Wilton, and Finucane. Just more grunt out of those guys there, just depending on how much they use the forwards there. But I guess Brown and Moses against Moylan and Trindle, you just need to see some more out of Moses potentially in this game. Maybe having Russell back out on the sting and understanding those sort of calls, as well as Sevo there as well. But an interesting couple of stats here. The Eels actually have won 10 of their last 13 matches at CommBank since last year. And then the Sharks have won only 3 of their past 10 games against the Eels. The Sharks actually lost their only previous game against the Eels at CommBank Stadium 28-4 in 2021. The Sharks have only won 3 of their past 10 games against the Eels, so it's actually repeated that stat. The Eels have not started the season with back-to-back losses since 2018, so that's a couple of interesting stats. Last year they only played once at Shark Park at PointsBet Stadium. 18-16 was a score back in March, so similar type of year. But then prior to that, 27th of March, 28-4. The Eels beat them, and then prior to that in 2020, 14-12 there. So how much you really take away from those games, apart from maybe last year's games, doesn't really sort of show consistency. Last year, Mulatalo, Katoa, Tracy, and Wilton all scored for the Sharks, and then Moses and Marnie scored for the Eels there, obviously in that loss. Then looking back to the time prior, 2021, Blake Ferguson was playing Sevo, RCG, and Ray Stone, so I probably wouldn't be looking into too much about the previous games prior to last season. But as I said, we'll go into our predictions after that one. The next game is the Broncos versus the Cowboys down the road from where I am now. So looking at, obviously, the Broncos are actually 183 at the moment, the Cowboys 198. The Cowboys obviously out of North Queensland Country Bank Stadium. Looking a bit clunky in that second half. The ins for the Broncos, Walsh, Madden are 2 notables. And then the ins, I'm pretty sure the Cowboys stay pretty much exactly the same. So 1 through to 18 for the Bronx is Walsh, Oates, Staggs, Farnworth, Cobbo, Mam, Reynolds, Jensen, Walters, Huss, Capewell, Ricky, Carrigan, Pakes, Palacia, Flegler to Powell. We really like that that lineup for them. And then Arthur's back to the reserves. 1 through to 18 for the Cowboys, Drinkwater, Felt, Holmes, Hiku, Tuolagi, Dearden, Townsend, McLean, Robson, Cotter, Hess, Nanai, Tomalolo, Granville, Neem, Tamoa Brown, and Tamo, with Brennan Elliott as the 18. Both sides super strong. But, I mean, with Coro back on that sting, Reece Walsh as the fullback, we really like the Broncos in this one. A couple of the Broncos stats here. They actually started with a 2-0 record in 2 of the past 3 seasons. The Cowboys actually won 4 of their last 5 games against the Broncos. The Cowboys winger, which is Kyle Feldt, has scored 7 tries in his past 6 games against the Broncos. And then Oates has actually scored 9 tries in 12 games at Suncorp. Well, scored 9 tries in 12 games at Suncorp in 2022. So a couple of good stats in that one there. Their last meeting, they played up north. They actually got smashed both times, the Broncos, 40-26 to the Cowboys, and then 38-12. But prior to that, in 2021, 37-18 was the Broncos winning. Last season, that high-scoring game, that was in July. Tuolangi, Neem, Feldt, Robson, Nanai, and Tuolangi scored a double. Walters, Oates a double, and Cobbo scored for the Broncos there in that high-scoring affair. Holmes was 6 of 6. Reynolds was also 4 of 4. That 38-12 loss early in the season at Suncorp at this same time of year. Farnworth actually scored a double. Nanai had 3 tries. Neem, Holmes, and Dearden chipped in with 1 each. Holmes once again 6 from 6, and Reynolds 2 from 2 there. Last but not least, 37-18 was the Broncos win, but it was a completely different lineup, so I'd take nothing out of that game there. But I'll go into a bit more about the preview when we have a look at sports betting, etc. Saturday, Sydney Roosters versus the Warriors. It is at Allianz Stadium in Sydney. 129 for the Roosters. We just don't like the Roosters line at this time of year, but going through the list, the only out is Lodge. Manu is potentially back in the centre position, so that provides a bit of punch through the middle. But sort of going through these lineups here, 1 through to 18 for the Roosters: Tedesco, Tupou, Suoli'i, Manu, Paulo, Keary, Walker, Colin Smith, Baker, Butcher, and then Radley. Turpin, Hutchinson, White and May on the bench there for the Roosters. And then 1 through to 18 for the Warriors is Chance, Kusi, William, Pompey, Montoya, and then the halves, Martin and Johnson, props, Fanua Blake, Barnett, at hooker, Egan, Ford, Niukore, and Harris in the back row there. And then Walker, Afoa, Curran, and Ali on the bench there. Couple of stats here. The Warriors completed a fair amount of sets last week against the Knights. They actually finished with the second best completion rate in round 1. The Roosters struggled to control the ball, making 13 errors, which actually is the highest tally in round 1. Tohu Harris played super well for the Warriors, but the Warriors have lost their last 6 games in Sydney, while the Roosters have won 9 of their last 12 at home venues in 2022. Daniel Tupou has scored 9 tries in his past 8 NRL games, so he's on a try-scoring streak. And the Warriors don't often start the season 2-0. It would only be the 4th time in their history if they were to do so. But everything's favouring the Roosters in this one. 22-14 last year in April, 32-12 April the year before, 18-10 in July back in New Zealand. That'd be 2020, so that wouldn't have been in New Zealand. So Tupou scored last year, and Walker also scored. Kosi and DWZ scored for the Warriors. In the previous game the year before, Tedesco, Butcher, Morris had a double, and then Josh Morris and Hutchinson had one as well, Pompey and Harris. But then I wouldn't be looking back at that 18-10 game back in 2020. Completely different sides, as we mentioned. But we'll go into a bit more about that one in our sort of bets when we open that up. The Dolphins, the Raiders. So there's not a lot on this game apart from obviously the team lineup. So if we look 1 through to 18, Ray Stone's out for the Dolphins there. Milford potentially comes in. You look at their reserves: Jennings, Milford, Nikorima, Collins, and Famasuli. Donahue on the bench: Teague, Nichols, and Lemilu. In lock for them is Gilbert, Bromwich, Kafusi in second row, and Wallace, and then Jesse Bromwich in the props. Jeremy Marshall King as hooker, Sean O'Sullivan and Katoa once again named at 5'8" and halfback. Tessie and Asako on the wings there, Aiken and Lee in the centres, and then Tabuai through the backs, at fullback, and then the only outs for the Raiders is Rapana, so 1 through to 18 for them. Fullback Chris, So he moves back there. Stays back there. Kotrick and Hapawate on the wings there. Hapawate obviously comes in for Rapana. In the centres, Tomoko, Smith, Shields, White and Fogarty in the halves. Solo and Tapani as props. Danny Levi as hooker. Young, Whitehead and CHM. And Starling, Maratoa, Horsburgh and Gula off the bench there. James Schiller is their 18 there. I guess there's not much to cover off the Dolphins-Canberra game, but it'll be looking at potentially if there's a plus line available. At the moment, the Dolphins are 252, the Raiders are 153, but we'll need to have a bit more of an in-depth look. I mean, it is out at Redcliffe as well, so, their home venue, and if they can produce what they produced last week at Suncorp, why can't they do the same again at their home stadium out there in Redcliffe? Next game is the Storm and the Bulldogs. So out's obviously Munster, 1 through to 18 for the Storm, Meaney at fullback, Warbrick and Coates on the wings, Smith and Young Tomonpea in the centres. Wishart obviously comes in that 5'8" position for Munster along with Hughes. Nass and Welsh as props, Grant as hooker, Leoro, Katoa and King in the forwards for the Storm. Bronson Garlic on the bench, McDonald, Penne and Jordan Grant there. Grant Anderson is the reserves. 1 through to 18 for the Bulldogs. They remain pretty much unchanged. Hayes at the back, Carraz and Adokar on the wings, Averillo, Alamote, Burton and Flanagan in the halves, King and Sutton as props, Reid Marnie, kick out for Taylor Mariner and Brown, Tanner Waddell, Pele and Preston there. As the reserves, Braden Burns, and that's pretty much all we've got to mention there. A few stats there. The Storm have won their past 7 games against the It's the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs haven't won at Amy Park since round 6, 2016. The Bulldogs won only 2 of their 12 away games in 2022. The Storm have won their opening 2 games 5 times in their past 7 seasons. So there's a few stats there, and they've also had some big wins against the Bulldogs in the past. So 44-0 last year, 52-18 the year before, and 41-10 the year before that. Last year, Pappenhausen scored 4 for them. Coates 1 on the wing. King actually scored a try, and then Bromwich and Kafusi also scored there for the Storm. The year prior, it was a try-scoring feast. Adokar actually scored. He's now with the Bulldogs, but Kafusi, Hughes, Welsh, Kamikmika, Jennings, Pappenhausen, Olam, Adokar, Hines all scored for the Storm in a 52-18 win. Averillo actually scored for the Bulldogs there. The year before, we may as well go into it. Adokar scored, Hines, Olam, Bromwich, Venavalo, Bromwich and Adokar. So a lot of those players not currently with the Storm anyway. So we don't think it'll be that much of a drubbing for the Storm, but the Storm should win. And win pretty easily in that matchup. And they're actually only paying 150, so their line might be looking good in this one. Jerome Hughes, he ran for a fair few metres, but he didn't have to do too much last week as sort of Munster took over and Harry Grant did his thing. But, we can see these guys, if they can connect up well and break through like the Sea Eagles did, and, you've got Meaney running in support, all they've got to do is just break some holes in the lines, and that's something Nasser and Welsh can both do. So it could be a game like that, or it could be a nice, tight, even unders game in that matchup. Moving on to Sundays, a couple of interesting matchups. The Tigers and the Knights, 1 through to 18 for the Tigers and 1 through to 18 for the Knights. Pretty much the same from last week, so we won't go through it. But we'll just jump into a couple of stats for these games. So the Tigers have only won 3 of their last 11 games at Leichhardt. The Knights won home and away games against the Tigers in 2022. The Tigers are aiming to avoid a 0-2 start for the 3rd straight season. And Dane Laurie actually scored in his last 6 games at Leichhardt. So anytime try scorer Dane Laurie looks good in this matchup there. The last few matchups, 14-10 last season for the Knights, 26-4 last season as well, early in the season. But in the year prior, 36-18 was the Tigers at Leichhardt Oval there. The scorers, Chuala scored 2 last season, as well as Tex Hoy. Naden and Kapoa both scored for the Tigers, so look at Naden potentially try. Ken Mamalo scored in the game before that. Clifford Frizzell, Best, Young, Gago all scored for the Knights in their previous matchup. Looking back to 2021, This one was actually at Suncorp, sorry, it was Magic round 10. Brooks, Tamo, Nofaluma, Dewey, Talau, and Dewey actually scored a double. Hunt, Jones, Bradley, and Frizzell all scored for the Knights in a high-scoring match, but that one was in Brisbane at Suncorp there. Nothing much else to go through in that matchup. Last game of the round is the Dragons versus the Titans. So all teams, obviously the Dragons didn't play last week, so they're coming off a bye. But they have made it available, and it's interesting. Amon is mentioned in here. He's in number 21, but he's in the reserves there. Not sure if he's been training with the side, etc., etc. But Gold Coast pretty much remain the same. Actually, Kieran Foran has been named. It's got here, his news on it is his knee is swollen, but I don't think it's a major one. We know how good he's been for us in pre-season. That'll be an interesting one to watch. The only out I can see there is Kieran Foran going out, and is it potentially Jaden Campbell then goes to fullback and Brimson jumps into the 6th jersey? That would be the most likely feat, and then you bring in Chris Randall as a utility there, or Aaron Carr can play the utility as well, but we'll sort of see how that one pans out. The Dragons have actually won 3 of their past 4 games out at Nostrada Jubilee Stadium. Fegai has scored 4 tries in 5 games at home, at the home venue out there. Sami actually scored 3 tries in 3 games at Cogra, so out there as well. And then Lomax, yeah, that's about it for the main stats in that one. Previous matchups, 46-26 towards the back end of last year, the Dragons way. Then 20-16 though up in the Gold Coast, and then 32-10 in the year prior. Last year was an absolute scoring spree. Mogo picked up 3, Amone had 1, Bird scored 2, Sullivan 1, Fegai 1, Amone actually scored 2, sorry. Brimson 1, David Fafita, Fermor, and Jojo Fafita all scored for the Titans as well. 20-16, Brimson scored, so look at Brimson's maybe anytime try in this one as well. Obviously scored last game. Both Wormel scored, Wallace, Asako, Figure, DeBellin, and Moses Suli. He's actually always a good look at as well. Fair bit of value in the centre there. In the game prior in 2021, Wallace, Sexton, Maju, Fafita, and Jared Wallace. So looking at Dave Fafita as well for a try, being consistent against the Dragons, and obviously if Foran does play, he's out on the same side as Foran, getting balls played to him quite well. But that is the weekly preview. Obviously, we'll go more in depth towards as the season goes along, but just sort of getting a feel for things at the moment. Looking at, I guess, best bets for the next round. We'll quickly can go into it. But obviously we'll do more analysis and research for the guys as we go. So the Panthers are paying 150 compared to the South 260. The line is minus 5.5. The over-under is 38.5. For that one, we'll just need to do some more research into the guys playing, the weather and everything like that. But at first look, we'd be staying away from any head-to-head or line in that one, potentially looking at the over-under in previous matchups. The South, if they can score as well as they did last week, but Penrith did look clunky. It's just the Brisbane weren't able to convert on them there. It'll be an interesting look at. Also looking at potentially anytime tries. Crichton, we're going to actually have a look at it now. So anytime try scorers, looking at Crichton 265, Cody Walker 360 there. Campbell Graham also value, scored 2 last week, 390. Liam Martin there, $4. So, Crichton 265, Walker 360. That's some good value there for those guys. Also, Alex Johnson 197. They're obviously predicting it to be a low-scoring game as to why those guys are high. For the Friday, Eels versus Sharks. Eels are favoured 150 minus 5.5. The Sharks are 260 plus 5.5. The over-under is 40.5 there. Anytime try scorers looking at, we can see more value in the Sharks anytime try scorers rather than the guys on the other side. But that would be something to look at. First port of call, we're 50-50 on that game as well. The Broncos and the Cowboys, 180 the Broncos at North Queensland, $2. We actually like the Broncos in this one, being at home, playing so well last week. Their offense looked clunky, but that'll improve with obviously Walsh coming to the back and attacking. But it'll be a game of chess between Reynolds and Chad Townsend, which will be interesting to watch. Anytime tries, Farnworth 295 looks good there. Also Nanai at 295 as well. I felt scored quite a few in the last few. Coates obviously has scored well against the Cowboys in the past. So there's a few good value bets there. Looking at the next game, we've got the Roosters and the Warriors. The Roosters minus 14.5. The Warriors plus 14.5. I mean, the Warriors plus line looks good in that one, but who knows what the Roosters might come out with, especially with Joey Manu back. The next game, Dolphins, the Raiders. Dolphins 260, Raiders 150. Plus lines plus 5.5. Over under is 41.5 there. We'll just be having a look at obviously the weather out of Redcliffe first of all, but that's potentially a perfect game. I reckon the Dolphins could get up on that one because Canberra don't like travelling into the heat, although they did travel up to North Queensland and have a close win. It's once again another travelling game for them where I'm not sure if they've gone back to Canberra and going back up to Redcliffe, but if so, that's a fair amount of travel in the last week or so. The Storm and the Bulldogs 139, the Storm minus 7.5, Bulldogs at $3. Over under is 39.5 there. That's a Saturday night game, so it'll just be depending how the weather looks down in Melbourne. Sunday's games, the Tigers and the Knights. Tigers are favoured 171, minus 2.5, the Knights 215. Over under is 42.5 there. Last game around, the Dragons and the Titans. Dragons 185, Titans 195. I would be potentially eating up that Titans 195. Over under is 40.5 there. That's 50-50 for us right now. But that is all for this week. Feel free to like, follow, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff, YouTube, wherever else. If you're interested in subscription, weekly, monthly, and annual, $19.99, $39.99, $1.99. What you get with that is obviously, daily recommendations for the NBA, recommendations when it is on for the NRL and AFL coming up, and analysis, stats, and insights, and all the good stuff, and obviously conversation with me if need be. But have a good week ahead. Obviously, we're quite a wee while out on Thursday night. It's only a couple of nights away, so there may be a couple more changes, but we'll update as we go. And good luck for your week ahead of punting. Thank you for listening.